Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look at ways that we can help each other and support each other in the ministry. Today, we have back with us Dr. Danny Dwyer. You've heard him talk before about Rekindle and the importance of assessment in the church. Today, he's going to speak to us about how we can set up a prayer partner ministry in our church. And so, Dr. Dwyer, before you've spoken to us about the importance of assessment and the different areas where churches might have needs, and prayer is obviously one that a church could have some difficulties with, but really all of our churches should be focused on a prayer partner ministry. How do they go?
It's just a great question because it is such a great, needy area. I don't think personally that I ever pray enough, for example. I never feel like I get caught up in my prayer life.
Yes.
Now, that's a good thing in a sense because if I did, I probably wouldn't pray as I should. Mm-hmm. And I never have felt like my church prayed enough. And so it didn't matter where we were in our ministry with churches. It just seemed like prayer was always important, obviously, but it was always necessary. And so how do we do that? It applies across the board, as you say, to every church, mm-hmm. particularly church revitalization, because at some point, the truth is, every ministry is going to be, I hate to use the word successful, but it's going to be spiritually successful to the point that they are praying and getting God's favor through prayer and obedience to the Word. And so how do we do that? How do we make this vital? How do we make it real? And then how do we apply it in churches? How do we make it happen, in other words? Well, part of the assessment, as you mentioned, is focusing on the prayer area. And then part of the rekindle process, if I may, is that a team is selected, a leadership team, a rekindle team, and one of those areas is going to be prayer. And one of those team members is going to be challenged and instructed about how to engage themselves, but also the rest of the church in an ongoing prayer ministry. Now, that's true. That can be true with any church, by the way. Having folks who are burdened to pray, who lead in prayer, because it all has to be, Dr. Moody, it all has to be intentional, and it has to be focused. Mm-hmm. I think that's especially important. If we're going to pray, we have to be intentional about it. If we're going to pray rightly, we have to be focused, biblical principles about prayer, of course. Mm-hmm. And so my design, my approach about assisting my church, other churches in praying is we select this area, we talk about it in the partnering agreements. Then part of what we discuss are the principles of prayer, mm-hmm. this wonderful little simple book, as it were, mm-hmm. that Dr. Maxwell wrote years ago. Yes. That is very, I think, still very timely today.
Yes.
About engaging people in prayer. Now, you're like me, I'm sure we have lots of books on prayer and so forth that all address different elements about it, but this especially is effective for this particular application. Yes. And so using the book, the principles of the book, and then having the team leader find ways to intentionally incorporate these principles into the church life. Mm-hmm. There are great ways to do that. Mm-hmm. You can have a prayer time before church, I think is one of the great ways to do that. Challenge people to come and pray. Do not be discouraged if half the church doesn't come.
Yes.
Be thankful for those who do.
Right. In fact, it's probably going to be a handful, if that, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And so we're not focusing here on numbers, although the more we get, obviously, the better. But we're trying to get people who are getting a hold of God mm-hmm. in prayer, praying before church. I like the idea, if you can work it,
yes,
of between Sunday school and preaching time, gather around the pastor and pray for him. I think just a brief 5-minute interlude, laying your hands on this man of God and praying before he goes in. I think there should be a time when a church focuses on prayer. I still like the idea of prayer meeting, although we do different things. I think we have to intentionally bring prayer into our meetings, however we do it.
Right.
We have prayer pages. You let people know. I'm sending out texts more than ever to multiple people about prayer needs and informing them with social media, texting, and so forth, getting people intentionally involved in praying about things. And so in the process of this, working through the book, here's how it works. Here's how we want to make it happen. And now find ways in your church that you can be intentional and focused on talking to the Lord. Now, let me give a couple of practical things with that, if I may. A prayer journal is great. And so getting your team leader and folks having a prayer journal and then sharing some of those things during times of testimony. Here's what God did for me. Here's the prayer request we asked the Lord. Here's what he did. I don't know of much that encourages people more than to hear answers to prayer, specific answers to prayer. And so a prayer journal is one of these ways to do this, sharing those testimonies. I like a bulletin board that displays biblical principles of prayer. Here's this verse. Here's this. Even taking some of these succinct statements about prayer, putting them on the bulletin board, ways to remind people. I think another good way to do this, I like a little prayer page and insert into the church bulletin. And it lists people's needs. You have to list people's needs and so forth. But may I say, you have to be discerning about that. Don't tell too much.
Right.
People tend to tell more than they should tell in a prayer request, public prayer request.
Yes.
So be discerning, be wise about what not to say. But it's good to pray for people by name, and it's good to know that folks are praying for you by name.
So a couple of things. You're saying start out with a leader. So some folks listening to this, you may be a lay person, and maybe if you're listening to this podcast, you might especially be burdened like I could do that.
Yes.
And we encourage you, just take the book, Partners in Prayer. You could get it very inexpensively and read through that, and you'll find a lot of what Dr. Dwyer is talking about. Figure out how you're going to do it. Pray before the service. There are some people that pray through the church, walk through the place where people will worship, and do it in that way, and maybe recruit some people to come along and pray. And I heard you mention using the bulletin board. That helps us to be intentional about our prayers, and to keep a notebook, keep up with what's happening, what you pray for, and how it has, how some of these prayer requests have been answered, and then sharing those with others.
Exactly. And I think all of those are just a few ways to pray. Who can say this is the only way? Well, nobody can say that. And so whatever fits, whatever is pleasing to God, whatever works in your personal situation, your church situation. I know several business people, for example, that I've worked with this, who pray while they are driving. Now, I encourage them to be mindful. The Bible says watch and pray.
That's right. That's right.
So you have to be mindful about that. So use your time wisely. Lots of folks have difficulty finding extra time, although that's usually a matter of you do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I think we have to decide praying for 30 minutes, an hour is more important than this TV program, and so forth. The more folks are engaged in supplication and prayer, the more it will impact their lives and the more it will impact their church. And in the whole scenario of church revitalization, no matter what the church circumstance is, a church that's in dire straits or a church that is actually healthy. By the way, it's one of the reasons why it's healthy is because folks are praying. Right. But no matter where you are with that, then prayer is an absolute essential Christian life. And we cannot avoid that essential in our lives. We do to our detriment but we engage in it in order for the Lord to bless and gain His favor upon what we're trying to do.
So you mentioned earlier about having a prayer request maybe in a bulletin, or having a prayer sheet, having maybe a bulletin board or something that has scripture about prayer. What specifically do prayer partners need to be thinking about to pray specifically for their pastor, their church leaders, for their church?
That's a great point. Again, I think intentional is the watchword here. To intentionally pray for your pastor and wife, intentionally pray for your church leaders by name, by responsibility. And so today, let's say, for example, we're going to pray for all of our Sunday school teachers. Or if you've got a lot of them, or we're going to pray for this grade, we're going to pray for this grade. And you just work through those day after day. You doesn't have to pray for all of them at once. You pray for those that you can in that particular setting, but you are intentional by name and responsibility, and then let me add, by need.
Yes.
Lots of times, though, well, all the time, all of those people have needs that they are dealing with. Just recently, wonderful people we know dealing with terrible sickness, cancer and so forth, and the loss of loved ones. And so these are good men and women, have responsibilities in ministry, but now they have personal needs, and all of that is impacting them up and down the board in their spiritual lives. And so by name, by responsibility, by need, I want to learn to pray for folks intentionally about that. And that's where your leaders come in. One of the things that helps me with our church now, for example, is I have 3 or 4 folks that will make notes and remind me, we need to pray about this person, pray about this person. Frankly, I have about, I would say at least 200 people that are on my prayer list. Well, I can't keep all of them at the same time.
Right.
And so some of your leaders, your prayer partners, your prayer team can lend assistance by reminding the pastor with little notes, let's pray about this person and this need and so forth. There are all kind of practical things to do that, but it's not what we're doing as much as it is we're praying about things. We're talking to the Lord who knows all of this and who responds to our prayers.
And you mentioned earlier sending text, maybe sending email, or even private message through social media, but many different ways we can do that.
That's true. And I think pastors today are wise to take advantage of the technology. Should never be substitutionary, but can be supplemental. And so supplemental texting technology usages, you have to be careful about what you say, don't say, but you can let people know. I have cataloged all the folks in our churches now, in our church, and I have them immediately on 3 groupings that I can send a text that covers all of these folks with this same text. Of course, you just copy and paste the same request. And it is I get reminders or thanks every week. Thank you for letting us know about this.
That's great.
And so pastors are wise to take advantage of those things. And so your team leaders, prayer partners, can lend assistance to that. If a pastor, let's say, doesn't have that technology mindset, but he's open to it, help him with it.
Right.
Do it for him.
Yes.
And work with him closely, keep him up to speed on everything, but help him with that.
Excellent. So lay people, you're thinking, well, the pastor doesn't know how to do those things. Well, you step up and you do that. You mentioned earlier about praying for specific people like teachers and various leaders and people with various sicknesses. At nafwb.org, we'll put up a journal. You may know of Dennis Wiggs did a journal a couple of years ago where you can pray through the weekdays with different requests, and folks could take that and adapt that to their situation. We've mentioned the book by John Maxwell, Partners in Prayer. Any other resources you think of that folks could look to help them as they're trying to establish this ministry?
there are just multiple books about prayer. And in all of the church revitalization books that are available today, and there are many, all of them will include some section about prayer. All the ones that I know of, anyway, will include that. So you find different slants, different dimensions about how to put this into practice. And so there are all kinds of resources about that. Of course, in addition, you never can get away from your own personal daily devotional reading, biblical studies and so forth yourself about prayer.
And a lot will come out of that naturally.
I find myself, by the way, as a pastor, addressing the need to pray more and more. And so I think pastors would be wise to give time to a series on prayer, preaching, teaching about this, the big principles about prayer, some of the great texts about prayer. Praying the scriptures is one of the key areas, a great principle, I think. Learning this is the prayer that Paul prayed in the book of Ephesians, chapter 2. So how can we put this into practice today? So pastors can teach and preach through this is a great way to help that as well.
And we tend to forget sometimes the model prayer, the Lord's Prayer we refer to, and it really does show us how we can approach the throne, how we can truly pray.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been very valuable, Dr. Dwyer. We thank you for coming back by and talking to us today, and we thank you for sharing with us how we can set up a prayer partner ministry in our churches, and we appreciate what you're doing with the Rekindle ministry. We just ask that God will continue to use you and bless you.
Amen. Thank you. Amen.